I think the biggest challenge that companies have in recruiting and retaining people is they're missing the people part. They're missing the human element. AI, automation, robotics will take care of basic tasks. What do you need humans for? You need humans for this imagination era. The most innovative companies, number one, work improvisationally. They're adaptive, they're flexible in their structures, their systems, the way that they think. Number two, the most innovative companies are solving a problem not just on a functional level, not just on a social level, but on a functional, social, and emotional level. Wonder and rigor are copacetic. And what I mean by that is wonder is found in the midst of rigor. Rigor cannot be sustained without wonder. If you spend too much time in the weeds, you'll burn out and you'll kind of miss the bigger picture. So you need both. Ask people to sit quietly to themselves and for the first 90 seconds, just generate 5 what-if questions around that topic. What that does is it democratizes the thinking, it honors the introverts in the room, and asking questions is a way of thinking. You must become a clumsy student of something in your life. There's got to be something in your life where you are not the smartest person in the room.
Ladies and gentlemen, today on The Sales Machine, we're joined by Dr. Natalie Nixon, the creativity whisperer to the C-suite and CEO of Figure 8 Thinking, one of the world's leading women-led innovation firms. Natalie has helped executive teams at Microsoft, Meta, Salesforce, and more to turn creativity into a measurable strategic advantage using her WonderRigor framework, where she challenges hustle culture and shows leaders how curiosity, foresight, and rest can actually drive growth in the age of AI. Welcome to the show, Natalie.
Thank you so much, John. It's really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited, especially about the work you're doing right now. You just wrote the book, Move, Think, Rest. Tell me, where did it all begin as far as getting involved with CEOs and coaching companies? Because, you know, there's a lot of ego out there. There's a lot of driven people. Where did it all begin for you?
Well, I considered myself more of an advisor to C-suite level executives and teams, and it really began when I was still a professor. I gave a TEDx Philadelphia talk, and that was back in 2014. And in that TEDx talk, I proclaimed that the future of work is jazz. And that was based on my doctoral research working with the Ritz-Carlton Hotel to understand the ways that they design experiences that don't just satisfy their guests, but exceed their expectations and delight them. So they are connecting with people on not just a functional level or social level, but on an emotional level. And it turns out that the most innovative companies, number one, work improvisationally. They're adaptive, they're flexible in their structures, their systems, the way that they think. And number two, the most innovative companies are solving a problem not just on a functional level, not just on a social level, but on a functional, social, and emotional level. So I give that talk, and I started getting invited into companies to help them build and design more improvisational ways of working. I was doing so much of that my husband, also named John, my John, said, babe, this is a thing. You need to formalize it. And I did. I created Figure 8 Thinking, my current company, as a side hustle, woke up a year later and realized I was having more fun with my side hustle. And in the early days, I was really advising leadership teams on how to design more improvisational ways of working. And really, the point of all that was so that they could innovate more consistently. The challenge was I quickly suspected that we were starting at the wrong place, because when innovation was a buzzword about 20 years ago, 15 years ago, in some organizations, it was a bit of copy paste. It wasn't really original ways of working that were attuned to the culture of that company. And what I began to suss out was that we actually needed to start with creativity. That if we started with building the capacity for creativity as individuals, as teams, and as organizations, then we would be able to consistently build these cultures of innovation. And so that was really how, so I really started with a nudge, an intuition, an internal question to myself about how might I help people who have P&Ls and who needed the answer yesterday and who are super driven to realize that they had to start with creativity. In the first place I started was to dispel this myth that creativity is something that only artists are great at. Because it turns out that the best CFOs and attorneys and accountants and engineers and scientists and executive assistants and farmers and teachers and artists are super creative when they embrace my WonderRigor method. That creativity is your ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems and design novel value. And if you think about creativity in that way, as this toggling between wonder and rigor, then it's your on ramp to building that capacity for creativity, which then means you can more consistently innovate and more sustainably innovate.
Yeah, and so let's talk about John. No, so John knew you were onto something.
He did.
And obviously you knew you were onto something. What was that key moment when after the TED Talk and you started to do it as a side hustle and you fell in love with it because it was triggering your wonder and it gave you more rigor because the wonder gives you the rigor.
You're absolutely right. I like to say that wonder and rigor are copacetic. And what I mean by that is wonder is found in the midst of rigor, and rigor cannot be sustained without wonder. If you spend too much time, if you're hitting the clouds, you'll never get any traction. But it's important to spend some time with big, dreaming, envisioning, audacious questions, right? If you spend too much time in the weeds, you'll burn out and you'll kind of miss the bigger picture. So you need both. That's why I say that they're copacetic.
Yeah, and profit. Because you can wonder and you can rigor all day long. But if you're not profiting, eventually it's gonna get you. And it gets, some of the best people in the world. But I'm 100% down with the WonderRigor framework. And today more than ever, companies are challenged with retention. Recruiting and retention are huge because people have so many different choices, even in the United States. I'm currently in the Philippines. These guys have tons of opportunity globally because they speak great English. They're extremely talented. Do you think is the biggest challenge companies or the problems companies have in recruiting and retaining people?
I think the biggest challenge that companies have in recruiting and retaining people is they're missing the people part. They're missing the human element. They are, in my view, in the future of work, the companies that will be able to attract and retain the best talent will be the ones who are really great at what I call inside out work. Their leaders will be leaning into being more personable, being more transparent, and being more vulnerable because AI, automation, robotics will take care of basic tasks. So what do you need humans for? You need humans for this imagination era, this moment in time where human consciousness, curiosity, intuition, all of the dimensions are inputs into work that make the outputs from AI more accessible, more tangible, and more meaningful and purposeful. So, for example, sifting through a bunch of resumes that might have just been AI generated is not a great recruiting tool. That's a starting place. But the so what behind that is once you can have an eyeball to eyeball conversation with the person, is to learn to ask different sorts of questions. I just quoted an insight from Steve Jobs at the 2025 Italy Tech Week, where he was quoted as saying, in the future, the main two skills that you need to be competitive are creativity and inventive thinking. And that's from one of the biggest tech titans. And he says that in every interview, he asks people, tell me about something that you have invented. Right? That is the key question that he wants to understand. So how in an interview process, when you're trying to recruit, can you gauge the levels of curiosity, of inventiveness, of inventive thinking, of their capacity for wonder and rigor, not just dwelling in one or the other, but this ability to toggle between both in order to deliver value. And so that comes from, for example, in an interview setting, asking very different sorts of questions, such as what Steve Jobs asked in terms of tell me about something you've invented, or having a person go away for an hour with their phone and take photographs of the environment that they're in, and then tell you a story about what they're observing. So those observational skills, those storytelling skills, those interpretive translation abilities that humans have to get to the next level and depth and layer of meaning are the sorts of people that you want. You don't want just task executioners. You want people who can tell you something you don't know, who aren't afraid to ask questions and who help you to ask new and different sorts of questions.
Yeah, and I see it on an individual level, and I love to quote the Bible. I'm a believer in God and a Christian. And one of the best verses in the Bible is without a vision, people perish.
That's right.
And, so for me, it's really establishing that purpose and that vision of serving the greater good, because a man without a vision is lost, right? And a man without purpose and a man and woman, I just use man, but ultimately it's any individual without a purpose is just going through the motions. And, eventually they're going to move on because the law of nature is we grow or die.
That's right.
I've been to some of the biggest companies in the world. I was part of a very small, intimate group, got to tour Facebook, and they don't even allow this, right? It's not allowed. You don't go on Facebook tours, Google tours, or because, there's too many threats in the world, quite frankly. You hear about the Google culture and the self-driving vehicles on the campus, and they call them campuses. I've never been to Apple. I think that would be the ultimate cool environment. Yet, at the same time, there's so much secrecy and confidentiality within that organization because they don't want the technology and that curiosity or the next innovative products getting out, right? But Facebook does it unlike anybody I've seen. I mean, I literally went into the different classrooms, the campus, all over, and the workstations and the desk. They rise up, they rise down. Every pod of small different divisions. There's snack bars. Everything is free. There's restaurants throughout the entire campus. Everything is free. There's a huge eating hall with Indian, Mexican, hamburgers, hot dogs, anything you can think of. Everything is free. And there's break rooms everywhere. So if the people want to take a rest, like you say in your book, Move, Think, Rest, they give people the opportunity to take a time out, right? Because let's face it, if you're just thinking too much and or you're overwhelmed and not solving the problem, sometimes the best thing to do is, like you said, take a walk, take some photos and step away from it.
Yeah,
Right?
everything you're describing that you observed at Meta. So it's the good news, bad news, right? Because they actually are implementing the motor framework. The motor is what I abbreviate for Move, Think, Rest, or MTR. So the motor human-centered operating system is a means to activate movement hygiene, because when we move, our ideas move, and we're actually not designed to be sedentary. We're designed to move because the spinal cord is an extension of the brain. And if we sit hunched over a laptop for way too long, i.e. more than 40 minutes at a time, then we restrict blood flow to the brain, which means we restrict oxygen, which means we're not actually doing our best thinking. The thought part is not just about quick, sharp, cognitive, rational thinking for decision making. How do you get to that kind of thinking? You need what I call backcasting and forecast. You need time to backcast and forecast. You need time to do deep thought. So backcasting is about memory, reflection. Why do I think about this in the way that I think about this? Forecasting is about curiosity, inspiration, dreaming, daydreaming, all the things that project us forward into this imaginary future. And when we have both of those, we actually sharpen our cognitive thinking because we're actually allowing the brain to go into the default mode network. And then rest is not just about having a nap room in the building. Rest is about micro breaks. It's about sabbatical. And companies like Meta, they are an example of a company, a lot of tech companies, a lot of nonprofit organizations, they offer sabbatical. The challenge is that not everyone takes the boss up on the sabbatical because they don't see the bosses taking the sabbatical. But everything you've described, the reason why I say it's good, the good news, bad news is we it's great when companies does the motor human-centered operating system within the building, and people need the opportunity to get outside of the building, to get outside of the work environment, to also do those types of that type of movement, thought, and rest. It needs to happen in both places. And in that way, trust is built, more generative thinking happens, more inspiration is occurring. And they're actually, all these studies are showing that, for example, the company Zape, they had a get stuff done week. And in that week, productivity spiked upwards of 10%. They didn't lose people because they let them alone and let them get stuff done. They actually retained people because people showed back up to work much more refreshed, much more rejuvenated, and appreciative that management saw them as humans. So those sorts of systems that Meta has in place is seeing the human dimension. It's also important that we create habits to make sure that movement, thought, and rest, that human-centered operating system, is happening off campus. And I also love that you mentioned that at Meta, they call it a campus. And that's very intentional because they really want to expand this metaphor of learning. So in the future of work, not only will the companies that can innovate the longest and attract and retain the best talent be the ones whose leaders practice inside out work, but they will be the ones that practice cultures of curiosity and learning and provide opportunities for learning. So it's a great example of how to embed that motor operating system at the office.
Yeah, and there's got to be common denominators in implementing your framework, because essentially, like you said, there's good and bad. Now, based on the last black swan event of the world, it was a black swan event. COVID was a black swan event of deception and wow, but it shut down the world and it changed how companies operate forever. So people were work from home. Zoom became a $1 billion company because of the situation, and they had the technology at the right time. And so now more than ever, and even me, I had to learn to embrace it, the work from home culture. And now I have a tech company, and it is just the culture because my
That's
people
right.
are hybrid. I currently live in Manila. I go back and forth from the United States to here. And if ever they've innovated anything, it's the traffic. They have more than anyone. They've innovated how everyone can have a car. So there's traffic. You could go 10 kilometers could take you, 7 miles could take you 2 hours. So it's insane to make your people come to work because it's 2 hours, and that's not rest.
No.
That's not rest. That's stress. And then so it's 2 hours to work, 2 hours to go home, 4 hours a day that you're incorporating stress for your people. COVID changed everything, and it's hybrid. So for me, it's as necessary, come to work. But how important is it for that team to not just jump on a Zoom, but to come together physically to get the buy-in? And I know that's up to the vision of the company. And I'm not talking about vision, mission, core values that are cookie cutter frameworks. That matters. But how much does it matter bringing the people together?
That bringing the people together is essential, and it's different than it was 10 years ago. It should be different than it was 10 years ago. It should be different than it was 20 years ago. Leaders and management have to be much more strategic in the ways that they bring people together. So, in my coming together in person, any high touch collaboration will become premium experiences. And the challenge is that we have new tools, but we're applying the new tools in old systems. And so there's a misalignment because we haven't figured out how to redesign the work week. Heck, we haven't even figured out how to redesign the meeting. I interviewed about 58 people for Move, Think, Rest. One of the persons was a vice president at Atlassian, which is a 100% remote global organization. One
We
of the
use
places,
Elysian. Yeah.
yeah, so one of the places where they started to examine their work culture and the way they design work is the 30-minute meeting segment. Who says a meeting should be 30 minutes? They started to challenge their assumptions about meetings, how often meetings happen, how long they take, the cadence of meetings. And so that won't happen overnight. And that takes deep thought. It takes collaboration across teams, within teams, vertically integrated thinking, horizontally integrated, because the technology means that we can work differently. The technology means that we can work part of the time from home. You know, one of the key complaints I hear from people is, why bring me back into the office to have a meeting that we could have had on Teams or on Zoom? So the problem is not that people mind coming into work, but they mind coming into work if it feels redundant, right? So when we come together, it has to be to do work that will exponentially accelerate or amplify the stuff that we got done on our own or on Teams or on Zoom, right? It has to be work that requires that human to human collaboration, that tinkering and deep thought that I can only do with you because you have a very different skill set than I have. And if we have 3 hours to do a deep dive on the XYZ problem, then it's going to be much more productive and much more effective. So merging the new tools we have with revised systems is what's really necessary. It's a both and approach. And we keep thinking about things as either or. Either we work from home or we are in the office. And it's not that black and white. It's much more nuanced, and it requires some really deliberate thinking that's going to take some time, depending on a company to company basis, sometimes on a team to team basis.
Yeah. And I see it. I work with a lot of B2B companies. And the reason why I see it is, in essence, what I'm saying is I see the problem with the companies that don't have it. And they've got constant turnover with their salespeople, constant turnover with customer service, constant turnover with customer success. Everyone has turnover with marketers because they're all lying. And that's a fact. Just kidding. I see it all the time because our company, the Sales Machine, our brand promise is we guarantee we can increase your sales, drive performance, and reduce your cost. Guaranteed. I'll give you your money back. If we don't achieve that, I'll give you your money back. Because I know we can do it, because we eliminate all of the redundant work of salespeople. We automate and innovate the systems and processes with our software as a system. So I can definitely do it. Now, a lot of the times, though, we get thrown into a bucket of CRM. And I'm not talking about our product and our services, as far as when we go into a company and we see that the culture is all about transactional rather than transformational. And
Or as I like to say, transactional versus relationship based selling.
Yes. And so our way of selling is really, really simple, and nobody got it better. Nobody got it more right. And my terminology sucks right now. Nobody could be more accurate than Zig Ziglar. And he said sales are SSS: service, solving problems, and making sure they're satisfied. When you come from service, and this is from me, never nervous. Never. I have no time for nervousness because I'm curious of how I can solve your problem. And I'm always in service. And so, sounds like woo-woo shit.
It's not, though. It's not.
Exactly. I mean, that's why I want to get into it.
The key part that you were getting to in the SSS model, which the WonderRigor method, the Move, Think, Rest human-centered operating system makes room for, is to build curiosity. You actually can't shift away from a copy-paste transactional way of working, of selling, of managing, unless you design ways to work that slow you down. You know, the Navy SEALs famously have said, that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And it feels very counterintuitive, but the only way you're going to be able to see the big picture in order to serve, to solve problems, to make sure the people you're serving are satisfied, is to slow yourself down so that you're not just pushing your shiny object, but you're trying to figure out what's keeping them up at night. What's the pain that they have that is, making them pull their hair out? And how can I better understand that? And what is the intersection between the pain that they have and the offering that I want to give to help make their life easier, to help make the life of their clients easier? And the only way you can figure that out is to begin to incorporate these very human-centered ways of working, which from my perspective really dial us all back to building our capacity for creativity. Creativity is your distinctive and distinguishing creative and competitive advantage to stand out from everyone else. And the reason why it works is because all of us show up creatively in very distinctive ways. But creativity thrives on curiosity. It thrives on three things. Something I call the three I's: inquiry, improvisation, and intuition. And inquiry is how to ask a better, new, and different question. Improvisation is about getting out of the rote script and into more experimental, nuanced ways to adapt the ways that you're working, the ways that you're selling, whatever the job is that you're there to do. And then intuition, now this is the part that now the research in neuroscience is really demonstrating. Intuition is a type of pattern recognition. And there was a research study done in 2010. It was called the Heartbeat Detection Study. And they had people sit on a chair with their feet on the ground. They asked people to tap out the rhythm of their heart without touching the pulse on their wrist. And some people were great at it, and other people were horrible at it. But the people who had what they called great interoceptive accuracy, they were able to tap out the rhythm of their heartbeat just by slowing down, sitting still. It turns out there is a correlation to their ability to make strategic decisions in high-stake environments where you feel super pressured. So it's not woo-woo. There's neuroscience to back that if we want to do more generative thinking, more expansive thinking, more bigger visionary thinking that translates to activity and results that, to the three S's that you're talking about, that results in, how did you say, service, satisfying people, and solving problems. The move, think, rest, human-centered operating system gets you to that. There is a business ROI to this. And now more than ever, because of so much saturation of technology, we have to balance out the technology. The technology is a lever. It's like a seesaw. It's a lever to amplify what makes us uniquely human.
I get it. I get it at the high. I get it at the at its core, and I get it at its essence. I've been talking for years about not only having the right vision and purpose and doing transformational work, not just transactional work. And whenever I go into companies, they're like, drive performance. How do you drive performance? And I'm like, it's got to be in the essence of the framework. So where are your rewards, recognition, competition, compensation? So what's in it for them, right? And not just money. So
No.
even if you look at companies like Apple, if you want to do great work, right? Do something, find what you love and you'll do great work. This is also from Steve Jobs, right?
Yes.
And from me, like I was in Japan speaking on tour to a group of different CEOs and different people. I used to be a keynote speaker, and I very rarely do that now because I'm just more focused on being a dad and building out my own companies. And, people, in the different environments in the different town halls would ask me, well, how did you become successful? And, even if you're doing work that you don't love. And I said, well, it's really simple. It's really simple. If you're not doing what you love, fall in love with why you're doing it.
Right.
Who's it serving? Fall in love with why you're doing it. because eventually you get good at that and you'll be able to do what you love. But for
And
now, and these were all young entrepreneurs, right? So fall in love with why you're doing what you're doing right now, and eventually you'll be able to do what you love.
you know what I love about your advice to them is you were honing in on something that we were talking about at the start of our conversation, which is the role of the emotions. Our emotions drive functional effort. And like as you advise, if you don't love what you're doing, what is one dimension of it that you can identify where you have this strong emotional connection? Because emotions are constructed. I learned that by reading the work of Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. And if you lead with emotion, if you lead with what is intrinsically motivating you to do this work, to help this person, to solve this problem, then you will naturally be much more inventive in your thinking. You'll be much more curious. You will show up in ways where you won't be intimidated to collaborate with other people. There'll be no shame to your game because it's all about towards the effort of keeping that feeling alive. And it's the feeling that drives the action that leads to our best work. You know, when I was a sophomore in college, I'm from Philly. I called us middle class aspirational. I grew up on a block of cops and nurses and secretaries, and I got advice from my parents when I was a sophomore in college. I had to declare a major, and I was terrified because I didn't want to disappoint them. I knew they sacrificed a lot for our education, and I wanted to make sure I got a good job at the end of a very expensive education. And I called them on the phone. I said, well, I got to declare a major in a few weeks. They said, okay, what do you think you're going to major in? I said, well, I started talking around the issue. I started trying to list all these majors that sounded impressive, like economics and political science. Either I thought they were boring or I'd almost failed them. And they knew me. So they said, well, what are you interested in? And finally, I confessed, and it was like a confessional. I really love this class in cultural anthropology and these multidisciplinary classes I'm taking in Africana studies. They're amazing. So I'm learning about philosophy and economics in a different way. And almost at the same time, my parents said, that's what you should study. And I said, wait, what? You'd be okay if I'd studied anthropology and Africana studies? And my father said, Natalie, if you study what you love, you will have to turn away opportunities because no one will have to tell you to wake up earlier, stay later, work harder.
Amen.
And this was a radical act from two African American parents who worked very hard to get their kids to where we landed. I was not looking at a trust fund to walk into age 30 or 40.
Come on.
Right? And for them to, first of all, it was like this load lifted off my shoulder, but it was this permission slip to follow my heart. Now, have I done jobs that I didn't love? Of course I have. But because in the back of my mind or just on the horizon or just through the end of the tunnel, I understood why I was doing that because it was getting me closer to the work that I suspected I'd love. Because now for the first time in my life, I have crafted a career based on all of the diverse experiences that I've had that have enabled me to do the work that I do. Couldn't have done that if I hadn't waited tables, if I hadn't worked in city government, if I hadn't been a middle school English teacher, if I hadn't worked in global fashion sourcing, if I hadn't been a professor for 16 years. All of that mattered for me to do the work that I'm doing now. So the role of emotion, as you say, is critical for us to do our best work. And there is a business ROI that we can extract from that. It's essential.
Amen and amen. There's so many golden nuggets that you just dropped. I mean, from shaming your game. I've always said, when in service, never nervous. It's all about your ego. You have shame in your game when you're coming from ego or you're trying to impress people. But when you're in service and you're curious about how do I serve this person, this individual, this organization, there's no nervousness. Get it done. Get in there and find out the root cause because essentially there is ROI. If you look at a company like Duolingo, that is an app to learn and it's all gamified. on trends. So that's where we use gamification with what we do. Rewards, recognition, competition, compensation, and trends, personal best, individual challenges, not just contests, not just competition. When you can incorporate that in a culture, that's what's going to change the game. Like every
Yeah.
time we have what I call game changer night for our organization, we have the sales machine, and our slogan internally is change the game. Don't hate the player. Don't hate the game. Change the game. Whether it's industry, individuals, don't hate. Change the game. Change the game you're playing. So a lot of organizations aren't there yet, as small, mid, and they might say, well, we don't have Google money. We're not Facebook, and
Even better.
all of this is woo woo. So when you go into companies, what do you see is the root cause? Because a lot of them don't understand. A lot of the times they'll start pointing the finger. They're blaming the leadership. They're blaming the people. There's a lot of a blame game. And for me, it's change the game. But the only way you can change the game is to identify the root causes of the problems in the organization and why they have a lack of performance. It's not just the recruiting, it's the retention, but what culture have you created? So how do you go into a company, identify what's going on in that game, and how do you change the game?
Well, I'm ultimately not changing the game. My commitment is to teach people to fish, not to give them I want to equip them with the process so that they can unearth the gems that are embedded right beneath their feet, that are embedded in the walls, that are embedded in the air. And so the first step is anthropology is the gift that keeps giving, because anthropology has trained me to be the observer, to be the curious observer, to be able to zoom out and ask questions, which requires humility, which always takes me from a stance of I have no idea what I'm talking about. So bear with me, but this might sound like a really naive question, but why do you call this the ABC, the XYZ? So it starts out with an audit of just being really observing and really kind of identifying present state. And then from present state, the gift process is to give people the time to imagine a future state. And that, so I'm invited to come in typically when the SWOT analysis has been done ad nauseum and they've done the typical MBA business school processes, but they're ready to hit pause and do some strategic envisioning work. And that's where I come in. So I like to equip people, definitely not with an instruction manual, not even with a roadmap anymore, but with their true north compass. Because if you have a compass and you can identify your true north, then no matter how hectic the external market is getting, how saturated the competitive landscape is looking, you can bushwhack your way through that dense forest if you have a true north. And so I equip people with 3 questions. And those 3 questions where we start are what if, so what, and now what? The what if gives people the permission to ask those big blue sky dreaming questions that might seem ridiculous at present state. The so what, so the what if is the wonder. The so what is that critical, rigorous lens. So why does that matter? So what might be the impact of this? So what if it doesn't work? So what? So like pummel it with really hard line critical questions. And then the now what is the merge of the WonderRigor. The now what can be now what? Now that we've dreamed and now that we've pummeled it with a critical lens, what's now what, right? But now what is also rigorous. Now what is our very next first step? So it starts out with this audit, bringing me as this observer, then equipping them with the compass, which is really these 3 questions. And from there, they really are giving, they develop their own design guidelines of how they want to look, feel, smell, act, sniff, sounds like, senses like as a culture. And those guardrails, based on those 3 questions, it's an involved process, helps them to plot their way forward so that no matter what's thrown at them, they have this compass to identify their true north.
And how do you demonstrate the return on investment? You keep talking about there is ROI, quite clearly ROI, and the greatest companies in the world, like people will work for less money at a great company than take more money at a shitty company. And
Well,
it's been proven over time that people, when they're part of something great, they'll accept less compensation to do something they love than to make more money and do something they hate. So how do you demonstrate to companies, because you mentioned ROI, how the ROI is going, how do they calculate the ROI in changing the culture, changing the game?
Well, I think about ROI in two ways. I think about it in terms of return on investment, which can be new revenue streams, lower costs, greater brand value, increase in efficiencies. And we can measure that in terms of before and after, right? And there is a soluble line between creativity and business ROI that I like to demonstrate in three. These are just three of the ways. When you commit to building your capacity for creativity, you do much more inventive thinking. And when you are engaging in much more inventive thinking, you identify new products, services, and experiences to sell, which unlock new revenue streams. That's a business result. When you commit to building your creative capacity, you must be willing to collaborate. Because the more diverse the inputs, the more innovative the output. If the two of us are just the only ones around the table, we keep asking the same old questions. We're going to get the same old answers. But once we begin to integrate different sorts of people, different skill sets, different types of team, different sectors that they worked in, we will open up the opportunity space. So collaboration, short term can be painful, but long term collaboration
It depends on who you're working with, and are they really collaborating?
It's not always a walk in the park, but listen, the longer term gains are awesome because collaboration long term increases productivity, which boosts efficiencies. And when efficiencies go up, costs go down. That's a business result. And that's a direct line between creativity, collaboration, and cost and lowering costs. And the third example is when you commit to building your capacity for creativity through wonder, through rigor, through the 3 I's, through the move, think, rest, human-centered operating system, then you decide to be curious and not fall in love with your beautiful little baby, which is the stuff you've been selling for the past couple of decades, where you refrain from, well, we've always done it this way. You put the little baby to the side and you lean in to what are the problems that my clients have? Let's get curious about that. So when you commit to building capacity for creativity, your curiosity increases. You identify what really is making people tick. And it's probably not what you on the surface initially thought. It's probably even more interestingly a need on the emotional level. Then you build brand loyalty. And that is a business result. So that's one way to think about ROI, return on investment. But the other way I think about ROI is return on impact. It's not, so the impact is increasingly going to be an essential way for us to do work if we want to survive. And that's why people will stay at a company where they are paid less, because the impact on their lives, on their mind, on their opportunity to grow is so much more valuable, more meaningful. It has this resonating impact. And when we think about value, there's financial value, but there's also social value and cultural value and intellectual value and capital. Capital has a lot of different dimensions. So I think about ROI in terms of return on investment and return on impact.
Amen and amen. And when you can impact an individual, they can impact an individual, and eventually you can impact the community, and then eventually you can impact the world. And I'm down. I'm down with that. I'm down with the impact. That was a great impact that you just gave. Love what you're doing. Love how you're doing it. Now, so let's skate to where the puck is going, because it's going. It's moving right now, and it's all about AI, and it's not new. It's actually been around for a long time, but we won't get into that. Where do you see AI playing a role in the work that you do, and or how it makes your work even more important? Because I'm all about performance, driving performance. But in essence, to do that, you need inclusion, because when you say cooperation, for me, cooperation, as long as you have the right people in the room, even if you have the wrong ones, you can learn and grow from that.
That's
But
right.
you can definitely.
Yeah, collaboration thrives on a bit of friction. I learned a lot from a gentleman named Jerry Hirschberg. Never met him, just read about his work. He used to be the head of design at Nissan, the car company. And when Jerry Hirschberg was the head of design, he would intentionally invite in people from finance, manufacturing, sales, marketing to opine with his design team on whatever the design challenge was. And his designers initially hated it because they thought, why do we have to bring in these people? They don't know what we do. We're fine. We don't need them in the room. He understood that friction that was happening because they would have to explain themselves. Their assumptions were challenged. Friction yields energy. He called this creative abrasion. That was his term for it.
Creative
Abrasion, and yes, it's a good thing, right? To be with people
Amen.
who rub you in a little wrong way. They make you think. They make you explain
Who's
yourself.
the devil's advocate?
Right. But that's how we unpack this muddled mess and begin to see our way forward.
Yeah, and that can be a force multiplier because all growth happens in perturbation. And most people don't even understand the word, but it means when you're under pressure, you can handle the heat. That's why the old term, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. And I know I was in that kitchen very young at a very fast-paced restaurant. And you know what? It just hardened me. And the only way to grow is through. You got to go through the perturbation, go through the friction, be able to understand the devil's advocate and or what it is that's going to drive you and mold you forward. And then you'll come out of it bigger, stronger, better.
Right. I like to say that creativity loves constraints. And so you were asking me, what's the role of AI in the work that I do in helping companies and teams and individuals build a capacity for creativity? If we play our cards right and we don't use a chat GPT or a Claude or Notebook LM or whatever the AI tool is as the end all be all, but just as the beginning, it can help. We can insert some friction into our thinking process. So one of the questions I love to ask these AI tools is, what am I missing? What I will plug in a draft of something I've written. What's a question I should be asking at this point? Oh, this is interesting. Let me go research that now. Let me integrate that point of view into the way I'm thinking about this dimension of innovation or this dimension of leadership or this dimension of future work. I studied ballroom dance. I've been studying consistently for 5 years, and I had a lesson today. And my dance instructor and we were talking about he started. I'm learning. We're working on a choreography for a hustle for an upcoming showcase. A showcase is basically like a recital for grown-ups. It's a lot of fun. And the song comes on. I was like, "Oh, this is a good song. I really like this song." And he said, "You're never gonna believe it. This is AI. It's an AI cover of like an old George Michael song." I was like, "Get out! No way! It's so good." He's like, "I know." He's like, "It's kind of I hate to love it." But we were talking about it for him as an artist, because he's also a musician, he's a dancer.
That's when the hate word's allowed. I hate to love it.
Okay, that's when the H word is allowed. But the AI generated music, if you know music theory, if you know chord progression, if you're a dancer, if you know choreography, if you know the basic technique, what if that becomes the place to help you build upon that? Then it becomes your co-pilot, your collaborator, your co-creator. The challenge is not all of us are approaching it in that way. And that's really the inflection point we were at, where how do we all get on the same page or gamify, incentivize people to use the technology as the starting point, not the end point, in order to build their creative capacity. Those are the sorts of questions that interest me right now.
Right on. So what would be the final advice you would give our listeners about how to implement this if you cannot travel the world, right? And you cannot be at every single company, because I'm definitely going to not only implement the book and your frameworks, right? But where do people start? Where would you suggest they start to implement changing the game with your frameworks?
So I'm going to give 2 points of advice. One is for people on a personal dimension. One is in their work environment. I'll start with the work environment. In the work environment, start with the way you structure and design meetings. don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I know you're not going to be able to redesign all meetings, but in a 45-minute long meeting or even a 30-minute long meeting, could you start with 5 minutes of what we call question storming? Not brainstorming, but question storming. So 5 minutes of identifying what is the topic of this meeting. Maybe it's the sales goals for Q3 2026, or maybe it's a new marketing strategy for 2026, whatever the topic is. Maybe it's the holiday party, whatever it is. Ask people to sit quietly to themselves, and for the first 90 seconds, just generate 5 what-if questions around that topic to themselves. And then that 90 seconds, ask them to pair off either, breakout rooms on Zoom or in person. This is a great use of time and in-person interaction in the office to discuss what are the questions questions, not solutions. Typically, people find a lot of overlap. And then ask those duos of people, share your favorite question that the two of you came up, that you two of you shared. And sometimes there's a mashup. And then in the larger group, you end up with 10 really interesting questions. Then you can gamify what are the 3 questions we want to vote on that we're going to keep coming back to around this topic. What that does is it democratizes the thinking. It honors the introverts in the room, and asking questions is a way of thinking. It begins to help to build that culture of curiosity, and it's the beginning steps that you have to start redesigning meetings. So that's one piece of advice. The second piece of advice is on a personal level, to start implementing the Move, Think, Rest, Motor Human-Centered Operating System, the WonderRigor framework. You must become a clumsy student of something in your life. There's got to be something in your life where you are not the smartest person in the room, where you're clumsy, you're awkward. You got to raise your hand, ask a question. You got to intuit a little bit. You have to be bold to experiment and tinker, because what's happening when you are a clumsy student of something in your personal life, you are activating different neural synapses in the brain, in different regions of the brain, that then you're ingraining that wiring so that at work, you're not as shy about asking the silly question. You're not as reticent to be experimental or improvisational with something. You're not going to ignore your intuition, because you're seeing the ways that it helps you to become a better chess player, a better cook, or a better ballroom dancer. For me, I'm a clumsy student of ballroom dance and open water swimming, right? Also, when you're a clumsy student of something, it brings you joy. John, you used the words game and play. When we are at play, we are engaged. How can we bring that energy into our work? You talk about attracting and retaining talent. People want to be at a place where they feel alive, where they feel seen, where they feel heard, where they are energized, and play is a way to do that. So redesign meetings, start with question storming, and become a clumsy student of something.
You are amazing. I love your background. I love what you're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, you've got to move, think, and rest, and you need to implement it in your lives. Thank you so much for being on the show. Guys, you can find her on LinkedIn. She has over 24,000 followers. Natalie Nixon, PhD, #1. Go buy the book, #2, and watch your game start to change. Thanks for being on the show,
John.
Natalie. Thank you. This
so
was
much.
Brilliant. That's a wrap, folks. Thanks for joining me today. And if you got value from this episode, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and refer a friend. And if you want even more value, go to thesalesmachine.com, click on resources, and there's tons of resources there to increase profits and drive performance in your business. Right on, come on.